Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did put their faith in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. These are like the bad guys plotting in their evil lair. "What are we accomplishing?" they asked. "Here is this man performing many miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our place," probably referring to their temple, or maybe just their place in society, their place and position in society, "and our nation." So they have a legitimate fear. If the Romans do catch wind of this, and if they deem Jesus to be a threat, as someone that the people are going to rally around, as someone who's going to take the fight to Caesar and get rid of him, they're going to get rid of Jesus. And they may get rid of all the other people in the process. And this will end up happening in about 40 years. There are going to be a number of guys who come along in the next century or so who will claim to be this Messiah figure, will claim to say, we're going to get rid of Rome, and they will constantly be fighting Rome and losing to Rome, and this will lead to long bloodshed and suffering and misery, and ultimately to the destruction of their temple and their place and their nation. That will end up happening. Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, that doesn't mean that the high priest position was rotating yearly, he was just high priest that year, spoke up. "You know nothing at all. You do not understand that it is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish." He did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation. And not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. So from that time on, they plotted to take his life. Now we have at least two people, which we'll read about later on in John, who were members of the Sanhedrin who did not consent to their decision to execute Jesus. Nicodemus, the guy that John has already mentioned a couple times, and Joseph of Arimathea, who from the other Gospels appears as the guy who takes charge of Jesus' body after it's dead. And they are both declared as being members of this council. So this incident that John is recording here, even though none of the apostles would have seen it, those two guys at least would have seen it, and they both apparently became disciples of Jesus. So if you want to know where the story is coming from, well, there's two potential possibilities right there. Probably Nicodemus, because he's only mentioned in John. And so he is probably the source of these stories about him in John. So Caiaphas is speaking unknowingly a prophet from God. And that happens sometimes. There are instances in the scriptures where a man can be preempted by the Spirit to utter a prophecy, whether or not he is aware of it. We've seen that before. The Spirit does communicate, however it feels like communicating. Or he feels like communicating. It's easy to think of the Spirit as an impersonal non-being, but he is a member of the Godhead, and he is an individual. It is easy to kind of forget to speak of him that way, though. Therefore, Jesus no longer moved about publicly among the Jews. I'm assuming this is all the Jews, just publicly. Instead, he withdrew to a region near the desert, to a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples. And he's only going to be there for a couple of months at most, because like I said, this story of Lazarus' resurrection is fitting in there somewhere between December and March. And I don't know where exactly, but Jesus is only going to be doing this for a few weeks at most. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, many went up from the country to Jerusalem for their ceremonial cleansing before the Passover. They had to be clean before the Passover week started. They kept looking for Jesus, and as they stood in the temple area, they asked one another, "What do you think? Is he coming to the feast at all?" But the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone found out where Jesus was, they should report it. He should report it so they might arrest him. They're going in. They've tolerated this Jesus fellow long enough. They disagreed with him. They've argued with him. but they're done tolerating him. He's got to go. We have got to get rid of this guy. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus arrived at Bethany. So he was there, then he left, and now he's coming back again, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here, a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Now, we have read about this dinner in the other Gospels, but John is putting it in its proper context. The other Gospels kind of move it a little bit later in the week, pretty much right before his death. But John is saying this actually happened before he even went into Jerusalem. This happened the week before the Passover. And he had been here. Like, there was a precedent for this because he had been here to raise Lazarus from the dead, and that's why this feast is this dinner is being given, and Mary is going to anoint him again, which I think she already has done once, which I think Luke alludes to in chapter 11 when he talks about that anointing, which I think he's actually referring not to this one, but to the one that Luke records in Luke 7. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Martha always likes to serve. So she just said, and that's not bad. That's not bad. We read about that in Luke, we read about it here. Martha likes to do things. She likes to serve. We never read about Mary doing that. We do read about Martha doing that. Martha served while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. So John is actually giving us the full account of this story. Again, this is another instance, I think, where John knows that we have already been familiar with this because it's already recorded in the other Gospels. And he is kind of saying, hey, here's how it really happened. This happened before we even went into Jerusalem. It happened at the house of Lazarus, given in Jesus' honor for his having raised us from the dead. And this is what's really going on here. He also names the woman, because Matthew and Mark do not do that. Well, one of his disciples, he also names the one who was instigating the complaining about her, which the other Gospels don't do that either. They just say they all grumbled. But John says, no, there was one who was the chief grumbler here. Maybe the only grumbler. But there was one who was at least leading the grumbling. One of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. But apparently they didn't know at the time. Even at the very end, the last time they see him before he goes out into the night, they still think he's going to go out and buy stuff. So they apparently did not suspect Judas at all until after it happened. Then they must have gone back and thought, oh yeah, that's what was going on the whole time. Now the other Gospels do not identify Judas as being the one complaining about Mary's. They don't identify either of the people, either the woman or the complainer. But John identifies them both. And it seems as though that this is the moment where Judas... Now, the other two Gospels do put this account of the story right before the account of Judas deciding to go to the chief priest and agree to betray Jesus. So they do seem to kind of link this event with like the final break between Jesus and Judas. I don't know. But it does seem as though this event might have been what kind of finally pushed Judas over the edge. He may have been going that way beforehand already, and this is kind of just what gave him that nudge saying, I'm done with this guy. But we really don't know, because none of the Gospels really say what Judas was thinking. And it's possible the other apostles never really knew, because they never saw him again. They never asked him why he did it. So it's possible that they never really knew why he did it. Leave her alone, Jesus replied. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. Meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there. And they came, not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well, because on account of him, many of the Jews, the common people, I believe at this point, were going over to Jesus and putting their faith in him. Which I think is the reason why Lazarus is not mentioned in the other Gospels, at least not directly. He may be hinted at in Luke. But I think he was probably when the other Gospels were written, he was probably still alive and in hiding somewhere. And so they were shielding his identity, his purpose, like his real role at the time, because it was still important to do so. By the time John is writing, I think he probably had already died again. And so therefore he was beyond the need to keep being protected in that way. He's sort of like, I think, sort of like in an early version of a witness protection program. And that's, I think, probably the reason why the earlier Gospels did not mention him. But by John, it no longer matters. Similarly to how I think the Gospels kind of shield Mary from being identified as a sinful woman and her bad past. Luke does say Mary Magdalene had 7 demons driven out of her, meaning she was a complete and total sinner beforehand. But they don't identify her as being specifically that sinful woman, even though I think she was. And I think possibly out of kind of respect for her and her role in the church and in the ministry. That was just something they wanted to shield her from. The next day, the great crowd that had come to the feast heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. They took palm branches and went out to meet him, shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel." Jesus found a young donkey and sat upon it, as it is written, "Do not be afraid, O daughter of Zion. See, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt." We've already read about this in the other Gospels, so we don't need to go into that again. That's in Zechariah 9, however. At first, his disciples did not understand all this. Only after Jesus was glorified did they realize that these things had been written about him, and that they had done these things to him. Now the crowd that was with him when he called Lazarus from the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to spread the word. Many people, because they had heard that he had given this miraculous sign, went out to meet him. So the Pharisees said to one another, "See, this is getting us nowhere. Look at how the whole world has gone after him." So what are they going to have to do? They're going to have to kill him. That's what you do. It's always been done. It's always been the rule. When a popular new insurgent comes along who threatens your position, you stamp him out. You squash him like a bug. But sometimes that just causes him to become even more prominent than he was before. I would have liked to have finished chapter 12 because that will take us to the end of the first half of John today. I just can't do it. I just can't do it. So I will do that next time.